Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike at Filmboy24. Today, we're going to talk about this camera. It's one I've had for a long time, but I've never used until now. So today I want to talk about this camera right here. I've had this camera for, I believe, quite a while. You see, I know it's kind of sad that I can't even remember when or where I actually got this camera. What I do remember, though, is that when I put batteries in it a couple of weeks ago, well, it didn't run, mainly because when I opened up the battery compartment, I couldn't even get the old batteries out. Yeah, it suffered from the, you know what I'm talking about, the corrosion issue that many of these are faced with over the years. So I cleaned it out. It took 3 days to clean it enough to where I could actually clean it. So I finally did as much as I could do, put new batteries in it, and I don't know if you can hear that, got it to actually run. I was excited about that because I know very, very little about this camera. I do know that Minolta is made in Japan, and they make a good product overall. I actually own quite a few Minolta 35mm cameras. This is the only Minolta movie camera that I actually own. I've had a couple in the past, Super 8. Let me tell you about this thing right here, though. It's the Minolta Zoom 8. It's an electric eye camera. I don't know when it was made. I maybe should have, checked that out, but probably sometime in the 60s. It's a very heavy and robust camera. Now, there's a couple things I like about it. There's a couple things I don't like about it, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And I am going to show you some results. I took this camera and I loaded it up with my trusty FPP Cine 8 black and white 100 ISO 8mm /8 film. This is a 100-foot roll, or it was, and I've spooled it down a few times into the 20-foot, you settle down, 25-foot spools, which is what this camera takes. With that, it does take standard, which was probably the most common in the 8mm era, standard 25-foot rolls of 16mm wide film that you flipped. After you ran it once, you would take the bottom or the take-up spool, you would flip it upside down, put it on the top, and you would run it again. And it would essentially, it shoots half of your film on one side, the other half on the other, and you're good to go. Since I have this open, this particular camera has the battery checker right here in the bottom. And all you do is you just pull the trigger, and if your little needle doesn't stay in the red, then your batteries are good. If it stays in the red, it's time to replace them. And speaking of batteries, I'm talking about the 4 AA batteries that go inside this handle. This camera also takes a meter battery right here in the top. You unscrew this, and I wish it wasn't so tight, like so. And it takes one of these batteries. Now, this is a replacement battery for the original. They're the real tall. This is a 1.5 volt battery. These originally took the 1.35 volt batteries in your meter. Well, they don't make these anymore, I don't believe. At least I couldn't find any in 1.35 volt. So I got the 1.5 volt. I actually had these for some other cameras, and I found out that my meter is non-functional. Well, I guess it's a good thing then that this camera, has auto and manual exposure. So this, well, it's okay. We don't really need it. And by the way, just for reference, this battery is called an LR50. There's a lot of other names for it, but this particular brand, if you search for LR50, you will find it. The finder. This is one of the things I don't like about it. It's really tiny and very dark in there, especially when the lens cap is on. It's a very small, I didn't find it a very user-friendly viewfinder or viewing system, but that's probably just my personal preference. My eyes aren't the greatest in the world, and it's tiny, and it's kind of in line with the way these cameras were back in the day. They never really had great viewfinders until Bolex started making the lighter and brighter 14 times viewfinders. Some of them are decent. This one, I'm not a big fan of. It does have the diopter adjustment, which you just spin it. And what that does is it focuses the viewfinder to your particular set of eyes. Me, personally, I can't see great up close. So I have to pull this viewfinder out pretty much all the way. And then I take my glasses off and I can see, you want to be able to see the ground glass or whatever your screen is inside the camera. You don't focus with this, you just focus your eyes to the viewing screen inside your camera. The auto exposure control is right here. It's a wheel on the side of the camera and it's set on auto right now. If you want to go full manual, you flip this wheel down and you roll right through all of your f-stops. And this particular lens, it's a 3:1 zoom. It goes from 10 to 30 millimeters. Stops down to 1.8. The camera is very easy to load. Like I told you earlier, it's a standard 25-foot load. You simply open the gate right here. There's a little lever here. Pull on the lever, lever. You load the film. You follow the little arrow. You go behind the gate into the take-up spool here. And then when you close it, this was a little different than what I'm used to, but when you close this, it doesn't actually, there's no lock on it. And I was a little confused at first till I realized that your lock here on the door, when you turn the lock to lock the door, whoop, whoop, that's what actually closes, fully closes and locks this gate right here. So when you turn this and when you, whoop, it's turning that little flange inside there and it's locking the door and it's locking the gate at the same time. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. Now, there's a couple things wrong with my camera. Like I said earlier, I can't get the meter to work properly. And my run and my lock switch down here, it's loose. So I'm leaving it on run. It worked for a little while, but essentially, if you hold the trigger in and you spin this little dial to the dot and you let go of the trigger, it continues to run. It's a continuous run. It basically locks the trigger in. There's also an L on the side of this little dial, and that is a lock. Now, like I said, mine doesn't really work. It sort of just freely spins. So I leave it to where I just use the trigger and I don't lock it. It also has, and I didn't bring it over here, but I'm gonna go get it. All right, had to go get my cable release. Now I have it. So it has a little cable release, a little socket, a little shutter socket here in the front. And I thought at first that it was for single frame operation, but it's not. This doesn't do single frame, this camera. So you screw in your cable release and it actually, when you depress the plunger here, it actually pushes your trigger for you for hands-free operation, except you need your hands, which I think was kind of a neat little feature. That's common on a lot of these old cameras, is the cable release, and you can pick these up anywhere online. This camera will also operate in 3 running speeds. It will operate in 12, 16, and 24 frames per second, my favorite. It has down here next to the shutter release or the trigger, this at first I thought was some sort of flash sync socket, which I don't know, maybe it is, but that's not what it's for. I'll get into that in a minute, but that's for a remote control. That's actually really a neat feature about this camera. Unfortunately, I don't have the cable for this, but let me show you. You unscrew the handle right here from the top, and this handle is what has your main AA batteries in it. Take the now once the handle's off, you have no power. Well, inside the handle, there's a little socket here, a little that you screw in one end of your cable, and then the other end of your cable into the side here. This handle then becomes your remote, and it has a little button here, boing, a little spring button. And as you push this button, it's supposed to trigger your camera. I don't know if mine works or not, because again, I don't have when I got this camera, it didn't come with that cable, and I don't know what kind of cable that is, so I don't have it. But it's a really cool feature, and I can tell you, I'm not kidding when I say this thing is really heavy duty feeling. Maybe that's a fault, I don't know, because it's, like I said, 3 pounds. So you just put the handle back on, screw it on, and you're back in business. Now, if you had a working meter, these will go from your settings anywhere, your ASA or ISO, it was ASA back then, I think they're more referred to ISO now, is right here on top, and you could set it anywhere from 10 to 400 ISO, and you would do that by turning this inner, or this little black ring here on your meter settings. The other side would show your DIN settings, and this one goes from 11 to 27 DIN setting. Underneath side here, which was a little bit hard to see, is a filter compensation. So basically what that means, if you put a filter on the front of this camera, the light meter up here, which is a separate, it's not through the lens metering, it doesn't know that you have a filter on the front of your lens. So if it's a darkening filter, like a polarizer or something like that, or a colored filter or an 85, or basically if you had any kind of filter on the front of this lens other than just a clear filter, your meter needs to know that. So on the bottom here, there's 3 settings, a ×1 through ×4. Now it does have 5 distinct clicks, so I imagine you could go in between those. And as you turn it, the higher the number, so X4, it actually closes the diaphragm down on your meter to emulate the same sort of light input that your lens has. It's a neat little feature. This window here on the side shows your focal distance when you zoom your lens in and out. This little, whoa, you settled down. This little meter here is your footage counter. It is in both feet and meters, and it resets every time you open the door. And lastly, it has a 1/4-20 socket on the bottom, and it also has one underneath the handle. So if you remove the handle, you can still mount it to a tripod, and you have your handy dandy strap and serial number on the bottom. Whoa, 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 what are you looking at? With that, I decided I wanted to give it a test run. So I set it down like that and hope you don't move. So, like I said earlier, I took some of this film. I have no relation to FPP. It's just a film that I had bought from them. I bought quite a bit of stuff from them over the years. This film is in a 100-foot spool, and I wound it down to roughly 25 feet. I think I got a little more on there. Took it to one of my local little hot spots here, Sugar Mill Gardens, and decided to give it a little test run. The footage came out, okay, a little bit overexposed, a little bit underexposed here and there. I did everything manually, and I just used an iPhone meter, so keep that in mind. Now remember, I process all of my own film, and I scan all of my own movie film as well, so keep that in mind. Although I am not a professional, and I get home processed results. Now, once this film is processed, since it is 16 millimeters in width, and we're going for 8 millimeters, because that's how we roll, we have to take a little guy like this. This is a Baya film slitter. Now, I did a video a while back where I actually show you my setup on splitting the film and all this good stuff. I'll put a link somewhere up here where you can check that video out if you want, so I won't get into, too much detail. This little guy here was kind of scratching my film a little bit, so I cleaned it as good as I could. You will see some horizontal marks on the right side of the frame. They're not nearly as bad as what I got last time, but there were still some. So without a lot more of this, why don't you take a look at the film and we'll be right back. So that's it. You know, the hardest part for me with this particular process, and I'm talking about 888, is not shooting it or processing it or even scanning it. It's getting the two pieces once you slice it, trying to figure out the orientation to splice those two lengths together. Now, I shot that at 24 frames per second, which I always usually do. I processed it in HC 110B for about 8 minutes at about 67.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And like I say, I scanned it in 2K on my retro scan. One last thing before I wrap it up. If you didn't see my found film episode on 16mm last video, check it out. It was one of my more interesting found film where I take an old roll of film and process it and scan it and show it to everybody here on my channel. And we maybe try to figure out where it came from or who it is. The last one, it's interesting. I want you to take a peek at it, and I've got 4 more rolls of that same batch that I have to finish shooting because they're all about half shot from back in the day. And we're going to process it. I think what we're going to do is we're going to do it in 2 roll batches, since about half of it's going to be mine and you probably don't want to see that. So we'll do it in 2 roll batches and for 2 more episodes and see if we can't piece together exactly what's going on here. It looks like a short film somebody was making, or maybe a long film. I don't know. If you enjoy videos like this and you want to see more, do me a favor. Yep, tap the like button. Subscribe so that you don't miss a single thing. And until the very next time I see each and every one of you stunning people, that's a quick one. I'll see you on the next go around.